You call it freedom. But why does it still feel like you're suffocating? You wake up when you're told. You show up where you're expected. You smile when you're supposed to. And the worst part? No one chained you to this. You did it yourself. You follow the script. The one handed to you by parents, teachers, lovers, bosses. And somewhere along the way, you stopped asking, is this even mine? You say yes. When your stomach knots, you stay silent. When your soul wants to scream, you make yourself smaller just to be liked. And every time you do it, a piece of you disappears. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, until you can't tell the difference between what you want and what others needed you to be. You were told, this is adulthood, responsibility, maturity. But what if it's just a softer prison, painted with praise, paved with people-pleasing? Maybe no one told you this before. You don't need bars to be imprisoned. Sometimes it's the fear of disappointing others that holds the key to your cage. You've achieved things, worked hard, played nice, and yet you still feel like something's missing. Like your own life is happening behind glass, and you're just watching. You don't scream, you don't break down, but deep inside, you whisper, this isn't who I really am. And that whisper, that's the part of you that's still alive, still fighting, still free. You were never meant to trade your truth for safety, but you did, because no one showed you how to live without permission. That's why it hurts. Not because you're broken, but because you're buried. And the deeper you go, the louder it gets. That question you've been avoiding. If this is freedom, why do I still feel so trapped? Because what you're calling freedom is really just permission with prettier words. You're not choosing, you're complying. You were taught to behave, to keep the peace, to be agreeable, flexible, kind. But no one told you how those same words can be used to silence your soul. You call it love, but it feels like performance. You call it success, but it costs you your sleep. You call it maturity, but it tastes like quiet resignation. And somewhere deep inside, you know this isn't living. It's enduring. You put your dreams in a drawer because someone else said they were too risky. You watered yourself down in rooms that couldn't handle your truth. You carried the weight of being good, even when it felt like self-betrayal. And the worst part? You praised yourself for it, because they clapped. Because you were told that sacrifice means strength, that invisibility means virtue, that approval is peace. But here's what no one told you. You've built a cage and decorated it with applause. You've mistaken compliance for peace and avoidance for love. Freedom isn't the absence of chains. It's the refusal to keep wearing them, even when they're invisible, even when they're comfortable. Because some cages are made of guilt. Some are shaped like families. Some are built out of silence, smiles, and survival. You were never lazy. You were exhausted from performing, from always needing to be on, from walking on emotional eggshells in rooms that never learned how to hold your truth. And here's the truth you've buried the deepest. You didn't outgrow your dreams. You just started believing they were selfish. You didn't stop needing connection. You just accepted crumbs and called it love. You didn't choose this small life. You just made yourself fit inside it because the alternative felt unsafe. So now you laugh, nod, hustle, perform. But when the room empties, when the show ends, you collapse into a silence that feels more like grief than rest. And in that silence, you finally hear it again. the whisper you tried to kill. There has to be more than this. And there is. But it begins with truth, not the one they gave you, the one that's been clawing at your insides for years, the one that says, you were not born to be agreeable. You were born to be free. And just when you think you're going crazy, when you wonder if you're the only one who feels this way, that's when Nietzsche arrives. Not with comfort, but with confrontation. He doesn't pat your back. He doesn't tell you it's all going to be okay. He tells you the thing no one else had the courage to say. You are not free. You're still a slave to their morality, to their comfort, to their approval, to their God. He doesn't mean a literal God. He means the voices you worship, the ones you still ask for permission from before you make a single move. He saw it in his time, and he sees it in you now. The tragedy of a soul that's alive, but afraid to breathe too loudly. You say you want to be free, but freedom terrifies you, because it means letting go of the lies that made you feel safe. Nietzsche called this the death of God, not a rejection of faith, but the shattering of every borrowed belief you've swallowed without questioning. It's the moment you stop asking, what do they think of me? And start asking, what do I think of me? But this is where most people run, because the cage, as painful as it is familiar. It gives you a role. It gives you applause. It gives you an identity, even if that identity is suffocating. But Nietzsche whispers, you must become who you are, not who your parents hoped for, not who your partner needs, not who society rewards, who you are, beneath the mask, beneath the guilt, beneath the polished persona you've spent years perfecting. This isn't self-help. This is war, a quiet rebellion against everything false inside you. And Nietzsche doesn't offer you peace. He offers you the truth, the kind that burns, then liberates. Because before you can be free, you must be willing to be hated, misunderstood, alone, unapplauded. He knew. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. And now, it's your turn, not to destroy the world, but to stop destroying yourself to fit inside it. You hear his voice not in the lecture hall, but in the silence after betrayal, in the pit of your stomach when you say yes, even though everything in you screams no. That voice is not cruelty. It's your invitation to become, to burn, to break, to finally be free. But how do you break chains you've convinced yourself don't exist? How do you fight back when the prison guards are your own thoughts? That's the part Nietzsche didn't romanticize. The part where you realize you're the one holding the mask in place. You stayed small because it felt safer than being misunderstood. You kept your voice low because you learned early that honesty gets punished, but politeness gets praised. And over time, you became fluent in emotional translation. You learned to shrink your desires into something digestible. You edited your truth until it sounded like gratitude. You buried your needs under performance, and the world applauded you for it. They said you were mature. They said you were easy to be around. They said you were strong. But deep down, you knew the truth. You were just scared. Scared of being too much. Scared of being too loud. Scared of being rejected, abandoned, dismissed. Because somewhere in your past, someone made you believe that being fully yourself was a burden. So you adapted. You learned how to take care of everyone else so they wouldn't leave. You learned how to be useful, charming, needed, so you'd be allowed to stay. You thought, If I make myself small enough, they'll have no reason to hurt me. But they hurt you anyway. Because love earned through performance isn't love, it's survival. And survival is not freedom. Let's go deeper. Why do you still say yes when every cell in your body is screaming no? Why do you smile when your chest feels like it's caving in? Why do you stay in places where your soul is withering? Because the cage is familiar. Because your nervous system confuses calm with control. Because part of you still believes that rebellion is selfish and obedience is love. You inherited these beliefs. You didn't choose them. You were trained to be agreeable, to seek harmony, not honesty, to be likable, not real, to endure, not evolve. And the longer you stayed in that role, the harder it became to recognize yourself without it. But Nietzsche saw this. He named it the herd instinct. That quiet urge to belong, even if it means vanishing. He said most people don't want truth. They want comfort. They want their illusions protected. And anyone who disrupts that is seen as dangerous. So when you start telling the truth, not just out loud, but to yourself, don't be surprised when they call you selfish, or crazy, or cold. They're not reacting to your truth. They're reacting to their fear of losing the version of you that made them feel safe. But here's what Nietzsche knew. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. And your why was never to be a puppet, or a peacekeeper, or a performance. Your why is buried underneath the silence, under the shame, under the years of being everything for everyone else. It's time to dig it up. Because the moment you stop betraying yourself to keep the peace, you'll realize the war was never out there. It was always inside you. And freedom? It doesn't come from escaping others. It comes from finally choosing yourself, even if no one claps, even if no one understands. Because real freedom begins not when the world says you're ready, but when you stop asking for permission. That's when it happens. Not with fireworks, not with a grand awakening, but with something far quieter, more terrifying, more real. It's that split second when someone expects your silence and you speak. When someone demands your guilt and you say no. When you choose discomfort over compliance, truth over peace, yourself over the role they gave you. That's the moment. And it will not feel like freedom. It will feel like grief. Because to become who you are, you'll have to kill who you pretended to be. You'll feel selfish. You'll feel cruel. You'll feel the pull to apologize for finally standing where you've always belonged. Because your body is still wired to fear disconnection more than dishonesty. That's why Nietzsche didn't call this liberation. He called it becoming. And becoming hurts. It's not pretty. It's not poetic. It's breaking your own heart so you can grow a new one. One that beats for you. He said, the snake which cannot shed its skin must perish. And you're still clinging to a skin that stopped fitting years ago. You wear it in conversations where you nod along, even though your gut clenches. You wear it in relationships where you beg for crumbs because they feel better than solitude. You wear it in the mirror, telling yourself, maybe this is just who I am, but it's not. It's who you became to be loved, to be safe, to survive. And now, survival is choking you. So here's the truth Nietzsche knew would break you before it could rebuild you. The moment you become free is the moment you realize no one's coming to save you. And that is your power. Because when there's no one left to impress, you get to speak without trembling. When there's no one left to obey, you get to rest without guilt. When there's no one left to disappoint, you finally get to live without performing. And that moment, when the fear rushes in, when your body screams to run back to what's familiar, that's the threshold. That's where most people retreat, because they think fear means stop. But fear is just the fire that burns what isn't real. And freedom? It's what's left when the fire is done. You'll lose things, people, roles, certainty, but you'll find something deeper. A voice that doesn't tremble, a truth that doesn't flinch, a self that doesn't vanish the moment someone disapproves. You will cry, you will ache, you will wonder if it was worth it. And then one day, you'll laugh without asking if it's too loud. You'll rest without earning it. You'll speak, and no one will recognize you except the child you used to be. And that's when you'll know. This is what Nietzsche meant. This is the moment. Not when you feel safe, but when you feel real. Not when they love you, but when you finally love yourself without needing their permission. So, if your heart is breaking, don't run. That's the door opening. That's the old self shattering so the true one can breathe. And yes, it hurts. But it's yours. That pain, that fire, that trembling in your chest when you finally say what you mean. Even if your voice shakes, even if no one claps, even if they leave, that is not weakness. That is birth. The version of you that needed to be liked is dying. And the version of you that needs to be whole is finally waking up. You won't feel triumphant at first. You'll feel tender, exposed, like your armor fell off and now the wind touches everything. But maybe that's what healing really is. Not becoming invincible, but finally becoming real. For years, you thought strength meant silence. That peace meant pleasing. That worth meant productivity. That love meant shrinking. But now you see it. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people, the wrong world. They taught you to be good. But good meant quiet. Good meant useful. Good meant sacrificing your joy for their comfort. And Nietzsche, he never asked you to be good. He asked you to be honest. He asked you to stare into the abyss of your own soul and not look away. Because true freedom doesn't come from doing whatever you want. It comes from becoming someone who doesn't need to lie anymore. Not to others. Not to yourself. You are not selfish for choosing your peace. You are not cruel for enforcing your boundaries. You are not broken because you no longer want to play the role they gave you. You are finally telling the truth. And the truth is never gentle in the beginning. It cracks. It confronts. It destroys. But only so it can rebuild. So if your voice is shaking, keep speaking. If your heart is breaking, don't rush to glue it back. Let it break all the way through. Let the false pieces fall. Because what's left is you. Not the mask. Not the character. Not the echo of someone else's expectations. You. Raw. Sacred. Unapologetically awake. This is the moment you become truly free. Not because everything is fixed, but because you've stopped running. Because you're no longer asking others to give you permission to exist. And if that costs you people, let them go. If it costs you certainty, let it burn. If it costs you comfort, welcome the discomfort. Because there's a kind of peace that doesn't come from being understood, but from understanding yourself. You don't owe anyone the version of you that made them comfortable. You don't owe the world your silence just because they're afraid of your truth. What you owe is to the part of you that waited. Waited through the pretending, through the pleasing, through the pain, for this exact moment. And if no one has said this to you before, you're allowed to stop performing. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to want more. You're allowed to walk away. You don't need to be the hero. You just need to be honest. Because that's where the real power is. Not in who claps for you, but in who you become when no one's watching. So if something in you stirred, if something cracked open, and it hurt, and it healed, and it felt like truth, write it. Say, I choose myself. Say it in the comments. Say it out loud. Say it to your reflection. Say it every day until the world inside you becomes louder than the world outside you. Because Nietzsche didn't leave behind theories. He left behind fire. And now, it's yours. Burn what isn't you. Become who you are. And finally, breathe.